Anatoly Onoprienko, along with Chikatilo, is one of the most bloodthirsty killers of the former Soviet Union. Just like Chikatilo, he is widely known in the West. At the height of his fame, in the mid-90s, he topped the list of the most bloodthirsty murderers of the last 2 centuries, according to the Agence France-Presse. In modern Russia, about people go missing every year, including children. They are not found. Listen to a documentary story about a Zhytomyr pervert to know the psychological portrait of a criminal. Perhaps someday it will help save someone's life. Anatoly Onoprienko was born on July 25, 1959 in the small village of Laski, Zhytomyr region. Tolya's mother died when he was not even 5 years old, and by the time his father had already left the family. Until the age of 7 he lived with his grandparents, then he was brought up in an orphanage. Childhood Onoprienko was not easy and joyless. He was deprived of his family, and this, perhaps, influenced his formation as a robber and serial killer. The youth of the future maniac was quite ordinary. After the orphanage, he studied at the technical school as a forester, did not finish, went to the army. After serving near Leningrad, he returned to Ukraine, studied at the naval school in Odessa, and then until 1986 went as a seaman miner on several ships. After leaving the fleet, he worked as a fire chief in the city of Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporozhye region. Onoprienko began his career in 1989, trading in robberies with his accomplice Sergei Rogozin, an Afghan veteran. His first victims were his husband and wife, whom Anatoly shot to death as they walked to their car. Later, at the trial, Onoprienko will say that he received neither pleasure nor benefit from the murder. In total, in the 89th year, 9 people were killed. All the murders were committed in a similar way. Onoprienko simply shot his victims. Among others, an 11-year-old boy was killed asleep in the car. Together with him, other passengers, 4 people, were shot. Anatoly burned all the bodies. Onoprienko will say about this episode that he had no intention of killing people. The purpose of the attack was a simple robbery. After this year, a long interval began in Onoprienko's bloody series. From 1989 to 1996, he illegally, without a visa, traveled to Europe, from where he was expelled twice, from Germany and from Austria. Little is known what Onoprienko was doing during this period of time. In his own words, he was a simple worker. However, there is a version according to which Anatoly lived by robbery, burglaries and petty robberies. Most likely, it is absolutely true. However, there is no evidence that Onoprienko could kill in Europe. He himself categorically denies it. He continued his murders in Ukraine, when he finally returned there at the end of 1995. Now the killer acted without accomplices, in cold blood, according to a clear, well-developed scheme. There is not a drop of pity in him for his victims, which he will say more than once at the trial. "I have never regretted anything, and I do not regret anything now," are his own words. Anatoly Onoprienko begins his new episode, which will become truly terrifying, in western Ukraine with the murder of Nikolai Zhychenko and his family. Zhychenko, his wife and 2 children were shot in cold blood, like the previous victims of the maniac. Onoprienko profited from wedding rings, some jewelry, warm things. As he left, he set fire to the house. Onoprienko himself told about one of his murders. When everyone was already asleep, he entered. First he shot the owner, then his wife, who begged, "Don't shoot," stabbed a 6-year-old and strangled a 3-month-old baby. Then he set fire to the house. Apparently, the killer did not even have a drop of pity for his child victims. The following murders were committed on the last day of the year, December 31, 1995. The Khrushchev family did not manage to celebrate the holiday. A maniac with a gun broke into their house. A married couple and 2 young girls, their twin daughters, became new victims of the killer, who was nicknamed the Terminator. He dealt with both grown men and their families with such ease. The body of one of the girls was found in the kitchen. Before she died, she was so scared that she bit her hand to the bone. Her mother Onoprienko chopped off her finger. He could not remove the wedding ring. and from this house the criminal took a few expensive things, and this house burned to the ground along with its dead owners. The maniac almost always acted in one way. On the same holiday, which turned into an unheard-of tragedy for the residents of the quiet village of Bratkovice, 2 more men, who may have witnessed the previous massacre, were killed in the same way. Not even the first week of the new 1996 has passed, and Anatoly Onoprienko has already continued his horrific adventures. On January 5, 4 people were killed in the Zaporozhye region, 2 men in a broken car, an accidental pedestrian and a policeman on guard. 4 more became victims of the murderer the next day. Onoprienko, in addition to rings and earrings, took off his shoes from the shot woman and took 2 bags of groceries. All the crimes were committed near the Berdyansk-Dnipropetrovsk highway. Mostly Onoprienko killed people in parked cars. On January 17, Onoprienko again visits Bratkovice. The village, which has become the main arena for the actions of the heartless maniac, will lose 7 people, for a family of 5 people, 2 adults, 2 elderly people and a 6-year-old child, and 2 more people Onoprienko met by chance. This day will be fatal. At this time, the killer lived with his cousin Peter, in the military town of Yavorov, just 30 kilometers from the place of his crimes. In the same place, Onoprienko meets Anna Kozak, a divorced woman a little younger than himself. Anna works as a hairdresser, has her own apartment, and has 2 children. Falling in love with Anatoly at first sight, she invites him to move to live with her. The woman is happy that she was able to meet such a man as Anatoly, reasonable, calm, a reliable support in life. Of course, she does not have the slightest suspicion about the other life of her lover, and he, under the pretext of a trip to his brother, then simply, on business, travels around the country, cutting out entire families. 4 people, 2 of them children, were shot dead in the Kiev region on January 30. 3 weeks later, the Dubchuk family was killed in Oblevsk in the Zhytomyr region. Father and son were shot from a gun, mother and daughter were beaten to death with a hammer. On February 27, in the Lviv region, the Bondarchuk family was killed. Onoprienko killed 2 children with an axe and their neighbor. The criminal committed his last murders on March 22, 1996, in the traditional way, taking the life of a family not far from the same Bratkovice. 5 more people added Onoprienko to his bloody account. 1 child was literally ripped open with a knife from belly to throat. The Ukrainian militia worked in an increased mode. The maniac. Now it became clear that this is one person, and not a group of accomplices, as was believed at first, must be caught at all costs. According to his lawyer Ruslan Moskovsky, said many years later, the killer could have been stopped even at the beginning of his bloody revelry in 1989. Then Rogozin and Onoprienko were practically accused of committing several murders. All the evidence was there. However, at the last moment everything fell through. For some unknown reason they stopped digging under Onoprienko. You can read more about this episode in Moskovsky's interview, which contains quite interesting information about both the case and the court. Finally, after months of laborious work done by law enforcement agencies, the killer was identified. It became known where he lives. The raid on the criminal became the largest in the entire history of Ukraine. Special forces armed with heavy weapons were involved in the case. About 200 people were involved. All these measures turned out to be superfluous. On April 16, Onoprienko, not even suspecting how large-scale the hunt for him was deployed, calmly opened the front door of Anna Kozak's apartment. The policeman who burst in immediately twisted Anatoly. So the terrible series of murders, which began in the USSR and lasted 6 bloody years, ended. After that, Onoprienko was kept in solitary confinement for a long time, taking advantage of a significant delay in the beginning of the trial, which, unfortunately, often happens in domestic justice. The preparation of the parties for the trial took most of the time, since the volume of the case was a huge number of volumes. In addition, some funding problems played a role. It was necessary to pay travel and accommodation for a large number of witnesses. Finally, on November 24, 1998, the process began. As already mentioned, Ruslan Moskovsky was Onoprienko's lawyer. By the way, during the trial, the offender asked to replace his lawyer with a more experienced and independent one, but his request was rejected. There was an incredible excitement around the Terminator trial. The courtroom was almost always overcrowded, with people crowding around the courthouse during the hearings. The killer himself had to be protected no less carefully than the people around him from him. Almost everyone wished Onoprienko's death, while many declared that it should be painful. During the hearings, Onoprienko behaved quite defiantly. He refused to name his nationality, called himself a hostage of justice, did not testify. At the same time, he quite calmly admitted the murders of more than 50 people, moreover, as if he was proud of them, attributing to himself even more. He quite calmly talked about his killing young children, while stating that they did not cause in him a single drop of compassion, no emotional outburst, in general, no emotions. The murderer explained his crimes by the fact that a certain voice from above ordered him to kill. It is hard to believe, in addition, such a excuse for criminals is far from new. Let us recall, for example, David Berkowitz. In general, Onoprienko spoke a lot about the motives for the murders and rather far-fetched. If you believe his words, you get the following picture. The killer planned 3 series of murders, each supposedly aimed at the good, 9 victims in the first, against dying communism, 40 in the second, against neo-nationalism, and more than 300 in the third, against the plague of the Akoksi century. This is explained by the fact that the dead are commemorated on the 9th and 40th days, as well as every year. The first episode was performed together with Sergei Rogozin. Onoprienko does not explain his role in this mystical story, but acting alone, the killer exceeded the plan. He had 43 human lives on his account. Another bloody series was prevented by the arrest. The benefactor failed to save humanity from the plague. It is obvious, in general, that Onoprienko's nonsense pursued several goals, such as making oneself appear more abnormal than it really is, or an ordinary game for the audience. However, his words about many new victims, most likely, were not empty words. The defendant said to his lawyer, according to him, that he committed his murders out of a desire to profit. This, however, is also doubtful. There was no special profit from the crimes. One way or another, the trial of the maniac continued. The trial lasted about 4 months and ended with Onoprienko's death sentence on March 3. The judge had to read the verdict several times, as many people shouted insults and curses at the defendant from the seats, and there was an incredible noise in the courtroom. Onoprienko met the sentence of execution, calmly staring at the floor. His accomplice Sergei Rogozin was sentenced to 13 years in prison. The prosecution requested 15. In 2000, a moratorium on the death penalty was introduced in Ukraine. The sentence was not carried out. However, residents of Zhytomyr and other Ukrainian cities organized a collection of signatures under an appeal to President Kuchma, calling for the suspension of the moratorium, especially for Onoprienko. These requirements were not met. Many years have passed since then, and he is still being held in the Zhytomyr prison. The guards say that the perpetrator reads a lot, behaves with restraint and decent, and hopes to one day be released. However, I want to believe that this will never happen, because once Onoprienko said, "If I manage to get out, I will start killing again." In general, for people like Onoprienko, separate institutions and conditions of detention are needed. What do you, viewers of our channel, think about this? Write in the comments. And also do not forget to share this video on your social networks, press the subscribe button and the bell for notifications about new films. Please switch to other videos that you currently see in the end screens.